So welcome. We are we're an intimate crowd here. I'm terribly sorry about this. It's not the only time I'm having tech issues. It's a mix of my own forgetfulness and also technology. Last time that I was intending to do it, in which I thought we could have done it in one session, I had just booked one session. And what happened was that I was in Sydney, where for some reason, the internet was not very great where I was. So I just said, let's do it next week. But I actually there was another course I was doing, which also I was doing in a similar way, where I had booked a few sessions. But unfortunately for this one, I hadn't booked a few sessions, which I assumed I was. So I was about to log on 10 minutes ago, 15 minutes ago, and I found out that I hadn't booked at all. So that's why you all got this just 5 minutes ago. Anyway, it's being recorded, and so those who can't be here today, they can refer to that. But to all of you who are seeing it later, I apologize. I'm very, very sorry. Mix of unfortunate circumstances, but of course a lot to do with my own just forgetfulness. There's a few courses running these days, and yes, I sometimes lose a bit track. Anyway, I'm very happy to be presenting the material that we're covering today. It's a wonderful vision of essentially this thing that we very often hear, how we cannot find nirvana anywhere else except in samsara, or rather we're not going to find liberation anywhere else except right here where we are. But we need to shift our perspective, and that's what we've done with the dismantling of our assumptions and our belief systems through this analysis of emptiness that we've been pursuing here in this study. So in this way, we've been challenging our assumptions about the solidity of objects. We've been challenging our assumptions about the reality as something that exists objectively, that it can exist in terms of a dualistic reference. And so we've been exposed to really the core vision of the Buddhist teaching. And of course, all the various aspects of practices that we have in Buddhism are all aimed at facilitating this insight. But we have a particularly profound approach within the Shentong that we're looking at now, which is really that all along, while we are confused, the ground is this luminous nature, which when this luminous nature that displays, that has the quality and the capacity to display, when it's filtered through confusion, we have klesha and karmas. When it's not filtered, we have what we call kayas and wisdoms. When it's filtered through delusion, it's what causes samsara. When it's no longer held back by this filter, it is the spontaneous, pervasive, and permanent display of enlightenment. And this is what we talk about when we then describe Buddha nature and how this abides as the core of what we truly are. So this is what we're looking at today, and we have a few scriptures from Maitreya that actually convey this particular teaching. So we'll look at that. As always, kindly begin with recognizing how this insight is something we wish to cultivate so that we can penetrate confusion and establish all beings at the level of enlightenment, that we can understand how what we've been studying here addresses the core issue, what we call the cause of suffering universally. And so we can hardly think of anything more relevant in terms of what we're doing with our life to actually get to the bottom of suffering universally is the noble intention of the Bodhisattvas, and then actually the purpose of the entire Buddhist path. So we're fortunate to then have here, we've been looking at this magnificent pith instruction from Khenpo Tsultrim Gyamtso. So I'm just going to just back up a little bit, slightly only, and just talk about this Buddha nature. So in general, in the sutra teachings, we talk about Buddha nature as being a seed, a potential that we have. When we come to the Vajrayana, we would say it is actually the reality of what we are, except it's presently obscured. But either way, it is the recognition that there is a ground that we have that is our, you could say, true nature, which in the present condition is filtered through confusion, and which we then, through the Buddhist of the path, the Buddhist path, we then aim at, where we aim at eliminating what it is that obscures this nature. So the Khenpo says about Buddha nature, the Tathagata Garbha, he says the purpose of teaching the Tathagata Garbha is to give meditators confidence that they already have Buddha nature. Without such confidence, it's very difficult to fully rest the mind free from all conceptual contrivance, because there is always a subtle tendency to try to remove or achieve something. So when we have that confidence, then we're not sitting there wondering, is this it? Am I now there? And all of that. We are introduced to this nature as being intrinsic to who we are. Of course, this very much, as we always would say, to actually recognize this nature, what we call the co-emergent wisdom, it really requires purification, eliminating everything that's getting in the way, the various obscurations and so forth. It requires a tremendous amount of merit that we can pursue this path, that we have the intelligence and the ability to constructively pursue this. And then it requires an authentic teacher that can guide us through this. So once these conditions are there, then Tathagata Garbha is not something that is viewed as just a mere nothingness. It's viewed as intrinsic to who we truly are. So this is the value of this vision of the Tathagata Garbha. And just a little bit about what we've arrived at, because in general, of course, the Madhyamikas, they understand how all the confusion and all the conceptual constructs, in fact, from the very start, have never achieved any real inherent existence. And so the Madhyamikas, they point to how reality exists intrinsically, free from our confused projections. But they also often operate with the idea that the qualities and the way that the Buddha's activity manifests is due to causes and conditions that have been laid down prior to the attainment of enlightenment. So what we're looking at presently, the Shentongpa view, it criticizes the view of the other Madhyamikas who say that the Buddha's qualities arise as a result of the good deeds, vows, and connections made by bodhisattvas on the path to enlightenment. They say if the qualities arose in this way, they would be compounded, impermanent phenomena that are not beyond samsara. The whole point of Buddhism is that Buddha is beyond samsara. Shentongpas accept the doctrine of the Tathagata Garbha Sutras that the Buddha qualities are primordially existent. So that's why we would say this nature has always been there. Nevertheless, at the relative level, they say, nevertheless, good deeds, vows, and connections are necessary for removing veils. So there's never ever a time where we would just say, oh yeah, we're just spontaneously Buddhas, we don't need to do anything. The same conditions really for the path are essential in order for us to remove what essentially veils Buddha nature. So we're looking at a few different texts, and we are looking at the one text here called the Majanta Vibhaga. And I think there's time today. I'll just sort of go over that, even though we touched on it earlier. He says, this is another of the 5 treatises of Maitreya. This text is interpreted by the Shentongpas as alluding to the following doctrine, which is found clearly expounded in the Samdhinirmochana Sutra. And this Samdhinirmochana Sutra, by the way, has been recently translated by 84,000, and it's called Unraveling the Intent. So there we can read, there are, and what is taught in there is the three modes of existence, the three modes of emptiness, and the three modes of absence of essence. So this is what we'll cover today. We've covered this earlier, but I just thought to go over it again. So remember when we talked about the three natures, and I'm just going to bring them up again. So we have them sitting here. So do you remember we have our mind as such can be understood as this big block here. And we refer to this as the dependent nature because it can be veiled depending on the degree of confusion. And confusion is then what we call the impure dependent nature. When we, through the path, the practice of the path, we gradually eliminate this impurity, then gradually what comes out is this luminous, innate quality that we then refer to as the pure dependent nature. So that's where we would say here the imaginary nature exists as mere conceptual creation, all of this. It is the objects that our concepts and ideas refer to. For example, since the real tiger in a dream is non-existent, it is merely a figment of the imagination. In other words, the imaginary nature, which refers to the content of the delusion rather than delusion itself, exists only in the imagination of the referent of names and concepts. So, for example, we have a tiger that appears in the dream. There actually is nothing there other than we are imagining something. There's nothing there beyond that. So he says, for example, we talk about past events. These events do not exist at all. They're simply names or concepts for referring to things that are being imagined, but which do not exist. Objects external to the mind and senses are of this nature. They do not exist, and yet names and concepts are applied to them. So that's where we're applying and labeling phenomena as solid that has nothing to do with the way nature actually exists, but we apply these concepts and we believe in these concepts. The dependent nature substantially exists in the sense that it is not just imaginary in the above sense. So that's why we do have a mind. We do presently experience having a mind, a subjectivity, first-person subjective experience. Thus, the thoughts, concepts, names, and ideas themselves that appear both to the mind and in it do actually occur. For example, the dream tiger occurs and produces an effect, such as fear, in the dreaming mind. However, the dream tiger is only substantial in relation to the real tiger that it is imagined to be. So it has no reality apart from just it being imagined to be a real tiger, which it is not. He says it is not substantial in an absolute sense. From the Shenton point of view, it's not enough just to refute the true existence of the imaginary nature. Shenton pursues Madhyamika reasoning to refute the true existence of the dependent nature as well as the imaginary nature. So that's not what we don't just say, oh, yeah, the mind is empty, but we also make a point of how the content of this mind, we need to relate to that. And that's why we're also establishing that as being empty. The perfectly existent nature, that is when when confusion is completely eliminated. So we have over here the imaginary nature, over here the perfectly existent nature. And that is essentially what we could say is who we truly are. That's where when Buddha nature is completely manifest. The Khenpo says the perfectly existent nature truly exists because it exists in a non-conceptual way. In the Chittamatra, the perfectly existent nature is said to be mere emptiness in the sense of freedom from the conceptual process of distinguishing outer perceived objects as difference in substance to the inner perceiving mind. Shenton say it is the non-conceptual wisdom mind itself. So here there's not any kind of labeling in terms of duality, the objects and so forth that are purified. It is indeed empty of the conceptual process of distinguishing outer perceived objects as different in substance to the inner perceiving mind. So the Chittamatras, they would say, oh, it's all the mind, and presently as part of the delusion is this duality. So that's where the Chittamatras, they would make a point about how this mind that is non-dual, it has a reality. The Shentonpas, they are Madhyamikas. They don't assert reality to anything. They simply rest in this non-conceptual wisdom mind in which these kind of dualistic fixations don't arise. He says it's also empty. This non-conceptual wisdom is also empty of the conceptualizing process that creates the appearance of a divided consciousness, the vijnana, i.e., a stream of discrete moments of consciousness with perceiving and perceived aspects. It is completely free from any conceptualizing process and knows in a way that that is completely foreign to the conceptual mind. So that's where the wisdom is not limited to the ordinary mind that thinks in terms of objectification within a dualistic conceptual framework. And that's, of course, also where we always say, you know, the absolute nature is not the scope of the conceptual mind. So the Khenpo said it is completely unimaginable, in fact. That is why it can be said to truly exist. But we could say, yes, this nature does have an existence because even it doesn't fall into the flaws of ordinary dualistic mind. Ordinary dualistic mind, we can say there's nothing in there that has inherent existence. And we're not actually saying that this has inherent existence, other than we're just saying that it is truth. And that's also why we call it the Dharmakaya. So these were the three modes of existence in terms of the three natures. Now, the three modes of emptiness. The imaginary nature is empty in the sense that it does not exist at all. It is the emptiness of something non-existent. The reference of names and concepts, the conceived objects themselves, never exist except in the imagination. They have no self-nature of their own. So they are said to be empty in themselves. Now, I'd like to say that what I'm presenting here, has never ever been thought of as something light. And this requires that we study this text again and again, that we through the entire text, and you could say the contextualization that has been taking place in the course of this study, that all of this we build on. And so an understanding emerges with regards to what we're talking about here. But then it's also important that we meditate, and that we meditate on the actual nature of what we're talking about here, in terms of taking our time, settling the mind, and several places the Khenpo guides us in meditation. At the end of the day, this is very much the style of meditation that we always promote within Siddhartha's intent when we're talking about just simple sitting meditation. And this kind of simple sitting meditation also becomes the foundation for all the Vajrayana practice that we do. So sitting meditation is the place where we really begin to get a clear sense and confidence in what is talked about here. So I'm saying this pretty much because we are talking about some big topics here, and to grasp them just sort of immediately as we're sort of going through them is perhaps not that easy. And so there we should just be patient with ourselves and just acknowledge, oh yeah, this is really interesting. And there will be things that click, but we will say, I want to go into the depth of this. I want to revisit this again and again. So that's why it's really essential that we have the book in one way or another, electronically or as a printed copy, and we then revisit again and again. So here, that's with regards to the imaginary nature, then the establishment of this as an empty. The Khenpo says some Shentong masters say that the emptiness taught by the Rangtong, these are then, as we studied earlier, those that say there's everything is entirely empty, free of inherent existence. He says that kind of emptiness taught by the Rangtong is nothing more than this. In other words, they do not regard it as being ultimate emptiness taught by the Shentongpas. So that's where the emptiness that we're here talking about, the emptiness of the imaginary nature, that is in fact what some Shentongpas would say. That is in fact what the Rangtongs end up saying by their description of the ultimate nature. So they say it's not really a complete understanding, and we'll see why. The dependent nature. Now, the overall nature of our consciousness is empty in the sense of being something existent, but not ultimately existent. In the relative, existence functions, having its own characteristics. It is empty of the imaginary nature, but not empty of itself. This is like the Chittamatra view. In absolute terms, according to the Shentong view, the dependent nature does not exist at all because they're Madhyamikas. They don't assert any reality. It is empty of self-nature because it is dependently arising. However, the appearance of dependent nature is only possible because, in essence, all appearance is the mind's clear light nature that does exist ultimately. And this is where then this luminous ground, that's there. This is the unconditional nature of the mind. And the Buddha says this in the Prajnaparamita when he says, mind, there is no mind. The nature of mind is luminosity. So that's how we would assert that. And from the way it's filtered in terms of the confused projections that we ordinarily have, yes, we definitely need to see that these deluded projections, they are empty. But the ground itself is not empty. He says that the perfectly existent nature is the ultimate absolute emptiness. It is the non-conceptual wisdom mind, non-arising, non-abiding, and non-perishing. It is primordially existent and endowed with qualities. It's not something that's created, it's not something that dwells, not something that ends, but it is something that then exists beyond time and space as something, as the very nature that is our ground. It is empty in the sense that it is free from all the obscurations created by the conceptual mind. Therefore, when the conceptual mind tries to grasp it, it finds nothing, and so it experiences it as emptiness. Thus, it is empty to the conceptual mind, but from its own point of view, it is the clear light nature of mind together with all its qualities. And that's why also we were looking in the study of Jamgön Rinpoche, where he says, from the point of view of appearance emptiness, then this nature, of course, is, in terms of the two truths, we would say its absolute nature is empty. But from the point of view of the two truths as authentic, inauthentic experience, it does have this luminous quality in terms of the experience. And that's why we would say in terms of authentic experience, there is then this, you could say, conventional appearance of the luminous qualities, the kayas and the wisdoms. Again, this is something that we'll return to again and again. So if this is new to you, then worry not. Please go over it again and again. And also, I would say the course that we did in Jamgön Rinpoche will be very helpful. So then where we've gotten to the three modes of absence of essence. So here it says the imaginary nature is without essence in the sense that it does not exist through having its own characteristic. For example, the imaginary fire does not have the characteristics of fire, which is hot and burning. So we dream of fire, or we imagine fire. It's not going to heat anything. We're not going to be burnt, really, even though there's a fire in our dream. In the same way, every phenomenon that is a conceived object, that is a conceived object of a concept, does not exist with its own characteristic. So anything that we conceive doesn't actually have any own characteristics. It's us that are projecting reality onto the phenomenal field. You could say the experience of object appears, but is entirely our creation. There's not an actual genuine object there. It doesn't possess any reality or any characteristic. So that's the imaginary nature. The dependent nature is without essence in the sense that it never arises. This mind has never really come into existence. Shentongpas refute the existence of the dependent nature by using Madhyamika reasoning. The perfectly existent nature is absolute absence of essence in the sense that it is the absence of essence, which is the absolute. In other words, its essence is non-conceptual. The essence of the non-conceptual wisdom mind cannot be grasped by the conceptual mind, and so from the point of view of the conceptual mind, it is without essence. From its own point of view, it is absolute reality, and that's why we call them Shentongpas, because they assert a reality in terms of authentic experience. Again, from the point of view of the way that we understand things by the ordinary mind, we could say, yes, it has no essence. It's something that is grasped by the dualistic mind. But from the point of view of the authentic experience of wisdom mind, that's reality. Otherwise, the Buddha would be out of touch. The Buddha would not be in touch with reality and so forth. So that, and also all the qualities of the Buddha wouldn't manifest. So this is, again, all comes down to essentially us graduating from, okay, this is sort of summing up what we've covered in terms of the entire study. What we've understood is that what we experience of ourselves in this world, it is mind. And that's already a biggie. That's where we begin to understand how the way in which we ordinarily think of the mind, the world as something solid out there, is flawed. And of course, this is also where we have a lot of, you could say, discussion around this in terms of the sciences. But at the end of the day, the fundamental nature through which everything that we know, experience, etc., is through our own mind. So that's where we understand, we establish all phenomena essentially being constructed by mind. What we then do in the Mahayana, and particularly the Madhyamaka, we understand that all of this appearance of the mind has nothing graspable about it. It's shunyata, it's emptiness. And that's why we're discussing this here, because we want to get to the bottom of this delusion that thinks there's something that we grasp onto and which trips us up, confuses us, and essentially veils and, we could say, wastes the natural abiding innate disposition that we have. So this understanding of emptiness is essential really for eliminating the confusion that keep us trapped, that keep us essentially unfree. So that's where the insight into emptiness is essential. But then we would say first we establish phenomena as mind, then we establish mind as empty, and finally, and this is what we're doing here, we establish emptiness as wisdom, because this empty nature is not just a blank nothing. This is the place where all the innate qualities of Buddha nature manifest fully. And that's where the understanding of emptiness needs to lead to a greater understanding of emptiness, which is then what we call the non-conceptual understanding of the absolute. So that's where we are now here, which is the non-conceptual jhana. So thus, the Khenpo says, according to the Shentong interpretation, this refers to then the works of the Buddha Maitreya, the Ratna Gotra Vibhaga, Mahayana Sutralamkara, and the Majanta Vibhaga all teach in different terms that the mind's true nature is the non-conceptual wisdom mind, and that this is the ultimate absolute reality. So this is good news. We arrive at there's a purpose to what we're doing. We're not just gonna, you could say, evaporate, disappear, but rather we're going to uncover this, you say, treasure trove of spontaneous qualities that have always abided within us, but it's never going to become the scope of the ordinary conceptual mind. So never ever like we're holding on to some dream of something then which will have eternal life, or we're holding on to some idea that there's going to be nothing whatsoever and so on. This is simply just where the ordinary confusion subsides and the natural wisdom becomes manifest. The Khenpo says, as long as this nature is not realized, the clear light nature acts as the basis for the impure, mistaken, or illusory appearances to manifest. In other words, it is the basis for the manifestations of samsara. Once it is realized, it is the basis for pure manifestation. In other words, the Buddha bodies, the Buddha realms, the mandala of tantric deities, and so on. So understand this, the ground nature, if we look down here, this scheme of the three natures, you see you have the pure dependent nature, which is then veiled. But you can imagine that you cover something. Let's say you cover a, what can we, well, let's, well, if you take your local, oh gosh, how can we describe this? It's a bit like if you cover somebody with a blanket. They're going to be underneath there. They're going to move, and they're going to be, if you try to pounce on somebody, put a blanket over them, they're going to move, but they won't really be seen. And this really will just have sort of the manifestation there under the blanket of what's underneath. So in the same way, this nature, when it's veiled, the qualities of it is not at all manifest, and it's filtered. That's probably the best term, is to say filtered. So when this pure light nature is filtered through the haze of confusion, that's where it then comes out as essentially what we call the kleshas and the karma. This self-centering, all the luminous quality that manifests become filtered through the subject-object division. And that's where we then have kleshas, the mind that is dualistic and then relates to all the appearing phenomena in terms of attachment and aversion, and then the patterns that become basic to that. When that's no longer there, then the innate luminous quality of enlightenment is spontaneously there in terms of all the countless qualities of enlightenment that are represented in the what we call the countless mandalas of secret mantra, the countless qualities of enlightenment. And overall, we would simply say that the nature of Buddha is such that there is the awakened bodies, the three kayas. Excuse me. Might put my phone on silent, I think. So it manifests as the kayas, the bodies, the Dhammakaya, Sambhogakaya, Nirmanakaya, and so forth, and also all the perceptions in terms of the Buddha realms, in terms of all the various displays in which the Buddha nature reaches out to sentient beings. So that's where we would say also that once Buddha nature is unveiled, its natural capacity is to benefit spontaneously for the benefit of all sentient beings. So this we speak about this in this context here, but it's also reflective in the other day. I was reading the commentary on the Diamond Sutra by the sixth patriarch in the tradition of Zen, and it's very similar. Just the understanding of how this nature of suchness abides at all times, and in its purity, it acts for the benefit of beings. So this is it's really universal to understanding the entire nature of our reality and the entire nature of the path, really. Khenpo says the wisdom mind is both emptiness and luminosity at the same time. The emptiness expresses its non-conceptual nature, and the luminosity expresses its power to manifest the impure, the samsaric, when it's filtered, and pure, when it's not filtered, the kayas and wisdoms. He says, this is the view that links the sutras and the tantras. It is taught in the sutras of the third wheel of the doctrine and is the basis for all tantric practices. Because tantric practices where we then engage this non-conceptual wisdom nature. We first approach it through the visualization practice of the development stage, then we, on a more subtle level, integrate this through the practices of yoga, and finally we integrate this through the non-conceptual approach of Mahamudra and Dzogchen. So this is all of this is the engagement really of this luminous nature and its unconfused aspect. So as for the tantric practice, the latter should be seen as special means for speeding up the realization process. In terms of the view, it is the same as that found in the sutras. So when we say that it's a special means for speeding up the realization process, is that we, in addition to having the view, the insight of suchness. We also have the skillful means that engages us in the yoga practice of suchness, meaning the yoga practice of body, the yoga practice of speech, and the yoga of integrating the view. So what's particularly about the Vajrayana is that we're no longer viewing ourselves in the phenomenal world in terms of the habitual patterns, but rather we right away acknowledge the suchness that is present as the ground of all reality, and we sustain that yoga practice. So even though we, as ordinary sentient beings, we of course have all the habitual patterns, we nevertheless are engaging a vision in which we recognize this already spontaneous present nature of suchness. So Khenpo says then with dream example, when the dream was used as an example in the explanation of the other views, the emphasis was very much on the illusory nature of dream appearances. From a Shinton point of view, the comparison goes even further than this because dreams quite clearly arise from the luminous quality of the mind itself. So we go to sleep, and it's not just that these sleep things, they're non-existent, they're not really there, but we're also interested in, isn't it interesting that the mind gives rise to dreams? The mind itself can produce good and bad dreams and can continue a dream even after it has become aware that it is dreaming. If you're aware in your dream, it doesn't end the perceptions. Thus, they can manifest whether the mind is unaware or aware. In the same way, the clear light nature of mind is the basis for both samsara, which is when the mind is unaware of its own nature, and nirvana, which is when the mind is aware of its own nature. So again, we see within samsara, there's plenty of appearance. Within nirvana, there's plenty of enlightened qualities. So whether the mind is aware or unaware of its own nature, that nature does not change. It is always empty of the imaginary and dependent natures. However, as long as the non-conceptual, non-arising wisdom mind is not recognized, the dependent nature seems to arise, creating the dream manifestations that the confused mind imagines to comprise an outer world interacting with inner minds. From this confusion, the idea of self and other, attachment and aversion, and all the other concepts and afflictions, the kleshas, that cause us suffering arise. It is just like getting totally confused and involved in a dream. Once the awakened consciousness returns, however, one quickly sees the dream as merely manifestations of the play of mind. And whether they subside immediately or not, they do not disturb the mind at all. So once we know something is not real, it doesn't really disturb us. We can then enjoy it. Just like when we're watching a movie, if we know it's a movie, then we just enjoy it. If we're not aware of it, then we're like, we're yelling up to the screen, watch out, whatever. So this is where we recognize that the mind has this arising quality, which is essentially the luminous nature. So it's whether or not we are aware that it is luminosity, non-dual display, whether we realize this or not really makes all the difference. So method of investigation, the key to this method of meditation, or rather non-meditation, is held by those who have the realization themselves. So that's where we need to rely on a guru. Finally, the Khenpo says, there is no substitute for personal instruction from a realized master who can, through his or her own skill in means, on the one hand, and the faith and devotion of the disciple on the other, cause the realization to arise and mature in the disciple's mind. So when there is this skillful teacher who has realization, who has the ability to understand the student, who is devoted to the student, and the student who has the great respect and the sensitivity to the greatness of the teacher, even though they can't fully comprehend the greatness of the teacher, they have enough respect and humility to be awed by the teacher. And in that moment of awe and openness, then something non-conceptual can emerge that we refer to as blessing. And that is where the student then can mix with the teachers or have some possibility of mingling with the teacher's wisdom. Again, something that goes beyond the ordinary conceptual mind. And that's where the faith and devotion of the teacher then, it becomes the cause for realization. However, the Khenpo says, much can be done to prepare the mind, and that is what this meditation progression on emptiness is designed to do. By carefully practicing each state in the meditation progression until some real experience of each level of realization has arisen in the mind, one's understanding deepens and the conceptualizing tendency loses its tight hold on the mind. So it's in combination then with the actual practice of analyzing, sitting with the mind, and also engaging in the practices that accommodate our particular dualistic experience. For example, the preliminary practices of the Vajrayana provides really the way in which we could gradually arrive at this place where we can meet the teacher and mingle with the teacher's wisdom. Gradually, Khenpo says, the mind becomes more relaxed and open. Doubts and hesitations lose their strength and begin to disappear. The mind is naturally more calm and clear. Such a mind is more likely to respond readily and properly to the teacher's oral instructions. Again, this is where we could spend a lot of time just philosophizing, sitting around, meditating a little bit. But when we have a structure and a guidance from a teacher, for example, the Vajrayana preliminaries and an actual path, then it's vastly different in terms of actually proactively engaging in this process. And that's where we, through that, can become open and ready to properly receive the teacher's oral instructions. In Kongtrul's Encyclopedia of Knowledge, he says the Rangtong view, that which you could say establishes the emptiness of everything, is the view for when one is establishing certainty through listening, studying, and reflecting. So that's where we understand, nothing can be grasped. Shentong is the view for meditation practice. That's where we settle into this quality of mingling with the teacher's wisdom. Meditation procedure. By the time one comes to meditation based on the clear light nature of mind, the investigation stage of the practice has come to an end. All there is to do now is to rest the mind naturally in its own nature, just as it is, without any contrivance or effort. As Jamgön Kongtrul says in the section on shamatha and vipassana, in his Encyclopedia of Knowledge, whatever thoughts arise, there is no need to try to stop them. In that state, they simply liberate themselves. It is like waves on an ocean that simply come to rest by themselves. No effort is required to still them. Meditation can be done as before in sessions, beginning with taking refuge in arousing bodhicitta, followed by dedication for the benefit of all beings. It can also be continued between sessions. From time to time, one can stop what one is doing and rest the mind in its clear light nature, and then try to carry that awareness over into whatever one is doing. Generally speaking, however, when one first starts to meditate on the clear light nature of mind in the Shentong way, one's mind is far from being free of conceptual effort. Sometimes there will be the effort to see emptiness of what arises, sometimes the effort to see the clear light nature, sometimes the effort to see them both as inseparable, sometimes the effort to grasp the non-conceptual state, to understand it intellectually or try to fix and maintain it somehow. So inevitably, on the path, we go through these ways of trying to understand and try to relate to this insight. Thus, in the early stages, one's meditation will not be a lot different from the early stages of the Chittamatra, which is when we begin to then be aware of the mind. And we simply practice coming back to this recognition that phenomena all appear on the basis of mind and then settling this mind. So at the early stages, that's what we're doing. He says this does not matter since this is moving in the right direction. Knowing the different ways of meditating helps one to recognize the level of realization that one is approaching. Knowing the subtle faults of that level of realization helps one to overcome them. So we recognize that when we have some grasping and some particular fixations, then of course it shouldn't prevent us from meditating, but at the same time also we don't get stuck where we are. Practically speaking, if we're on the path practicing, and for example, Tongse Khyentse Rinpoche, he will be teaching a lot of different, and generally the great gurus are teaching a lot of different things. We should just be open to whatever we hear and hear them and understand how they all have a place in terms of our journey. Might not be that easy initially, but there will come a place where we understand all of this really just comes from a single perspective, a perspective of wisdom that can be approached in countless different ways. So here then, in conclusion, the Khenpo says, Dharma consists of view, meditation, and action. View is the insight. That's what we establish, initially intellectually, gradually less and less intellectually, but it's the perspective. It's that which we know we need to deepen. Meditation is then providing the framework in which this can really soak into our being without the distraction of all sorts of other disturbing conditions. And then, as the mind matures through this soaking and integrating the view, we also need to integrate this in post-meditation, in action, as we're engaging with the phenomenal world. So then we integrate essentially the view through what we call meditation and post-meditation, or meditation and action. Khenpo says, in this meditation progression on emptiness, we first establish the view in a simple and brief form. This is important because if the view is wrong, the meditation will be also. So that's why, for example, if we were to think, oh, I'm meditating just to get away from the world, which is horrible, and I don't like the world, and I'm retreating into myself. Here's peace, but it's a bad world out there. Then we're going to be then the view is really, it's really flawed. And that's why we never actually penetrate, because we're not actually looking at our assumptions about reality, which in fact, as we've looked at here and discovered, doesn't have the reality that we attribute to it. So that's why it's so important that we have a view that's correct. And on the basis of that, then what we're integrating becomes very meaningful. Following on from having established what is the right view comes the actual meditation. Meditation, gom in Tibetan, means to train by accustoming oneself. This requires discipline and perseverance in the practice until realization arises. Again, that's when we might think of meditation as sort of going into something different realm, but it's actually not. It is integrating and remaining properly present, connecting. So that's where it's not about going into something, it's about simply accustoming ourselves with the view, with the vision that we have. Finally, then the Khenpo says, following on from the meditation comes the conduct that accords with the meditation. This is where we integrate what we've experienced. The meditation causes one's mind and attitude to change, and this means a change in one's conduct. For example, we begin to understand how phenomena don't have the solidity that they have. We become less rigid ourselves. We become gentler, and invariably, we also become gentler with others. We become more willing to connect and participate with others. We become more soft with regards to our perceptions of the world. So this influences our engagement. It also has, you could say, the bonus effect that we become more effective. We become more, you say, at ease in our interaction with the world. The Khenpo says, this meditation progression on emptiness needs to be carefully examined with a critical mind that is searching for the true and precise nature of reality. The Buddha said that we should not just accept his words out of respect for him or for any other reasons. We should examine them for ourselves and see if they are true or not. Only if we find them true and conducive to the good and wholesome should we accept them. We should examine the teachings like a merchant buying gold. He tests the gold by means of one test after another until he is perfectly sure that this is gold. It's pure and flawless. Only then does he accept it. In the same way, we should examine the teachings until we are sure they are true and without fault. Only then should we accept them. If we don't do that, if we just say, oh yeah, this sounds nice, and we just sort of say, well, all that logic, it's not really me, then it's nice, but it doesn't go that deep. And our engagement really just exists on a superficial level. And the deeper issues are never really touched on. The deeper assumptions about the reality of our person, the perceived reality of what's out there, it remains really just within the same confused, ignorant realm of solidification. It sustains samsara. So unless we actually really go to the bottom of what we're proposing here, then it doesn't really go that deep. So that's where it's not just that we should be critical from the consumer's point of view, but we also should realize without really examining the teaching, we don't really have the appreciation that leads to the deep engagement. So you're welcome to ask some questions. There's still a little bit of time. The Khenpo very kindly has sort of gone over some of the terms that have been using here, but I think some of you'll be familiar with it. Anyway, you should have the book, then you can read them, all of that, and it's kind of familiar to most of you, I know. There you go. So just hold it for a minute. I just want to, just a second, I'll be right back. Don't go away. Yeah, I found what I was looking for. So good. So any questions? My supplication to all is my sort of a wish with all of us here really is that we will hopefully through this study be inspired to continually engage in this investigation. And somebody was asking if there was a text that really follows up on this, and actually there's one of the Khenpo's students. He's an American student of Chögyam Trungpa also a student of Tsongsa Gyamtso Rinpoche. His name is Andy Carr. And some years ago, I went through a work of his called Contemplating Reality. And that actually, you say, elaborates on the themes that have been touched on here. So if you're interested, just email me and I can send you the recording of the course I did. It runs over, I think, 6 or 7 weeks. One of these Thursday night studies, online studies, with the you could say summary. But that work, contemplating reality, that would be very helpful if you want to follow up on what we looked at here. And again, remember, everything that great teachers like Tsongsa Gyamtso Rinpoche is teaching is essentially, again, comes from this place. A scripture that, a sutra that very much goes through the material here, but of course in a more classical fashion, is what we call then the Samdhyanya Mochana Sutra, the Gompa Ngepa Drelwe Do in Tibetan, and in English now recently translated as Unraveling the Intent. Previously published and translated and published as the Buddha's Wisdom, or Wisdom of the Buddha. by an academic, John Powers. But what we have here is very much the stuff of our journey into what we could call suchness, into what lies beyond the veil of our confused projecting mind, that which lies beyond the ordinary way that we construct things, and into a journey into things as they are. Ding am sich, as Kant would put it, the noumenon, that which is the actual nature of reality beyond the grasping mind. But I'd like to conclude then with a prayer, just because we've all been studying this together. I thought to chant this very profound prayer from the third Karmapa, the Mahamudra aspiration. So please kindly join me in just chanting this. Gurus, Idams, and deities of the mandala, victorious ones of the 3 times and 10 directions, together with your descendants, please consider us with compassion and grant your blessings, so that our aspirations may be accomplished just as we intend. May the river of the accumulated virtue of threefold purity, springing from the snow mountain of the pure thoughts and deeds of ourselves and limitless sentient beings, flow into the ocean of the 4 kayas of the victorious ones. Until this is accomplished, through all our lives, birth after birth, may we not even hear the words, evil deeds, and suffering, and enjoy the great, glorious ocean of happiness and virtue. Being free and well-favored, endowed with faith, exertion, and prajna, relying on an excellent spiritual friend and receiving pith instructions, may we encounter no obstacles to practicing them correctly, and may we practice the holy Dharma through all our lives. Studying scriptures and reasoning frees from the obscurations of ignorance. Contemplating the oral instructions conquers the darkness of doubt. The light born of meditation illuminates the natural state just as it is. May the brilliance of the 3 prajnas increase. Through the ground of the 2 truths, free from the extremes of eternalism and nihilism, and through the supreme path of the 2 accumulations, free from the extremes of exaggeration and denial, may we attain the fruition of the 2 benefits, free from the extremes of samsara and nirvana, and so meet with the unerring Dharma. The basis of purification is mind itself, the unity of luminosity and emptiness. The means of purification is the great Vajra Yoga of Mahamudra. What is to be purified is the contemporary stains of confusion. May we manifest the result of purification, the stainless Dharmakaya. Cutting doubts about the ground is confidence in the view. Sustaining that without wondering is the key point of meditation. Training in all aspects of meditation is supreme action. May we have confidence in the view, meditation, and action. All phenomena are the illusory display of mind. There is no mind. Mind is empty of an essence. Empty and unceasing, it appears as anything whatsoever. Investigating this thoroughly, may we ascertain the ground. Our non-existent projections are mistaken to be objects. Through ignorance, intrinsic awareness is mistaken to be a self. Through clinging to this duality, we wander within samsara. May we cut the root of ignorance and confusion. It is not existent, as even the victorious ones have not seen it. It is not non-existent, as it is the basis of all, samsara and nirvana. This is not a contradiction, it is the middle way of unity. May we realize the dharmata of mind, free from extremes. It cannot be shown by saying, this is it. It cannot be refuted by saying, this is not it. It is unconditioned dharmata, beyond conceptual mind. May we know with certainty the perfect ultimate truth. Whoever does not realize this circles in the ocean of samsara. Whoever realizes this is no other than a Buddha. Everything is altogether free from it is this or it is not this. May we know the secret nature of dharmata, the ground of all. Appearance is mind. Emptiness is also mind. Realization is mind. Confusion is also mind. Birth is mind. Cessation is also mind. may we cut through all doubts about mind. Unspoiled by deliberate conceptual meditation, unmoved by the wind of ordinary busyness, may we skillfully sustain the essential practice of mind that knows how to rest naturally in the uncontrived innate state. The waves of coarse and subtle thoughts subsiding by themselves, may the water of unmoving mind rest naturally, free from the disturbances of drowsiness and dullness. May the ocean of shamatha be stable and unmoving. Looking again and again at the mind that cannot be looked at. What cannot be seen is seen clearly just as it is. Cutting doubts about what it is or is not. Free from confusion, may our true nature recognize itself. Looking at objects, there are no objects, we see only mind. Looking at mind, there is no mind, it is empty of an essence. Looking at both, dualistic clinging is spontaneously liberated. May we realize luminosity, the true nature of mind. Free from mental fabrication, it is Mahamudra. Free from extremes, it is the great Madhyamika. Containing everything, it is also known as the great completion. May we gain confidence that, by knowing just this, we realize the meaning of all. Great bliss, free from attachment, is unceasing. Luminosity, free from clinging to concepts, is unobscured. Non-thought, beyond intellect, is spontaneously present. May these experiences, free from effort, be unceasing. Clinging to good experiences is spontaneously liberated. The confusion of negative thoughts is naturally purified in space. Ordinary mind, free from accepting and rejecting loss and gain, may we realize the truth of Dharmata, simplicity. Though the nature of beings is always enlightened, not realizing this, they wander endlessly in samsara. May overwhelming compassion be born in us for sentient beings who are suffering, whose suffering is boundless. In the moment of love, when overwhelming compassion flows freely, its empty nature nakedly appears. May we meditate day and night, inseparable from this unity, the supreme unerring path. Through the Dharma eyes and higher perceptions born of meditation, may we ripen sentient beings, establish Buddha fields, and fulfill our aspiration to attain the qualities of a Buddha. Having perfected ripening, establishing and fulfilling, may we attain Buddhahood. By the power of the compassion of the victorious ones of the 10 directions and their descendants, and by the power of all the pure virtue there is, may our pure aspirations and those of all sentient beings be accomplished just as we intend. Okay. So this is a very beautiful prayer from the third Karmapa, Rangjung Dorje. And it really sums up this single vision that we've been discussing here in the Khenpo's teaching. So we're grateful to the Nalanda. I think this was one of their early works, obviously. So this would have been translated under the guidance of Trungpa Rinpoche. All right, any questions? There's been not a squeak from any of you. I'm wondering, I hope hope we've had another mute session. I don't think so. Can you hear me? I think if you couldn't hear me, hopefully you would have made a, yes, there's some sign there. The hand going up. Okay. I'm assuming you can hear me. All right. Well, I'd like to thank you all having been a contributing cause in us studying this text here together. So this has been profoundly good. So no further questions. All right. Just as per, let's just see here. That's just the final dedication here, as we always do it. See if there's any last minute questions. Thank you very much. Thank you. It's a pleasure. Thank you, guys. By this merit, may all attain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may all beings be freed. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. Okay, thank you.